Library here in Independence, Missouri right now, and we are going to be joining this guided tour. Already kind of getting started, so we kind of missed the beginning. I guess he was talking about the significance of here, and we've got a lot of really interesting things.
But actually, the Tom from Missouri, but it looks like it would be Jim from Missouri on that side there. So. And then let's walk into the Oval Office here.
Yeah.
This is the Oval Office. Now, it's supposed to be an exact replica, but it's not. It's 94% the size of a regular Oval Office. It would be in the west wing of the White House. But this is his one. They'd taken pictures in 1950, and they used those pictures in 1950 to build this to make it look as exact as they could. The desk is a replica of Teddy Roosevelt's. When he had Franklin Roosevelt's desk, and he wanted to go ahead and have a different desk than Franklin, and so he gave that to Eleanor to take up to Hyde Park. He had this desk, and then they gave the original one that he had to the Smithsonian, and they had another one made. So this is a copy of that one. Everything on the desk is original. The chair is original. Behind there are some pictures of family and photos, and then the chairs back there in the back are for guests when they would come. First president to have a television, the old tube type TV, and then pictures on the wall or things that he liked or enjoyed, whatever. The most prominent pictures are on the wall here of the three presidents, where the president, of course, of George Washington. And then on the other side is General Sandy Martini and General Bolivar. And they liberated their country, so we're here in the Western Hemisphere in Spain. Below that is a clock given by Admiral Nimitz. And it stopped at 7:50, which is the time he died in 26. And then the globe here was given to him by Eisenhower when he was at Potsdam. He had a little time. They did a little driving around, went down to Frankfurt, and Eisenhower gave him that. The boat there, the ship is the USS Missouri. That door there would go to the secretary's office. And this door here would go to the cabinet room. Pictures there of, I should say, on the seal up there, you see the bald eagles looking towards the arrows. When he was after the war, he decided to change that so that the bald eagle looked towards the olive branch. And that over there shows that, and down the floor. He wanted to show looking to. Nobody believes in. Most of the time, he liked to read nonfiction, but over there you got some Mark Twain novels and documents. But over here you got the history of France, and then that little given to him by the crew of the USS Williamsburg, his yacht. Any questions here? Okay, let's go on over to the restoration of the White House here.
I've been to the Oval Office.
Oh, you been?
Okay, good. This area shows his 10 half-year shares, and that was when he was in the Senate. The senators are on a 6-year term, and then he got reelected back as being a Missouri senator, and then he only got 4 years into that term, and that's when the fourth term of Franklin Roosevelt came up, and they wanted Harry Truman to be the vice president for the 1944 election with Franklin, and so that's why it just says 10 half-year years. He got drafted into working with Franklin. It shows him as family here. He always wants his family. They call him the Three Musketeers. His family was not around him. He was very melancholy. Got very, he missed them an awful lot. But he did like being a senator. He enjoyed the camaraderie with the other senators. Now let's go over here. are too crazy about the White House, him and Bess. The White House was kind of making a lot of noises and whatever, and they thought there was even ghosts in the White House. But anyway, it was starting to fall apart. 1948, Margaret and a friend were playing the piano, and one of the legs of the piano went through the floor. They realized there was something going wrong here, and so they ended up getting a superintendent and maintenance and whatever looked at it, and they said, we need to redo the White House. In fact, it would have been cheaper just to go ahead and just bulldoze the whole thing down. But they didn't do that. They kept the outside shell, and then they gutted the inside part of it. And I'll show you some pictures here. This young lady was living. You're just perfect looking, I want you to know. This is the man that was doing all the building, the head of that. And then inside, they took the entire inside of the building out. And they even went down where the Situation Room is now. But they had these kind of beams in there, wooden beams. In fact, they found some of the old beams that were burnt during the War of 1812 when the British burned down the White House. But they took it all out. You can see the electrical system was pretty antiquated also. So they took all that out and they redid it. And then they put it all back together again. And it took about 3+ years to get it all done. They really didn't get back into the White House until late 1952. So they spent most of their time over here at the Blair House. And that was okay with the Trumans because they liked the Blair House. It was very homey to them. One of the things they did out of the White House was the buffalo mantle. You can see the buffaloes on both corners there. And then in the middle there's a prayer from John Adams. John Adams is the first president to live in the White House.
So this was out of the White House? Wow.
Yeah, this was given to him here. When they gutted it all out there, he was able to get this. And then over here, here's Harry Truman. Here's a portrait of him. And the thing I kind of like to bring out is the fact that he was buried with his Masonic apron on. And so when you go out here to the graves, it's kind of probably a spotlight what you're looking at now. And then over here is the USS Williamsburg. We kind of talked about that. That was his yacht. He loved that yacht. And in fact, that flag is the one that's over there in the office there that we were just at. And then it was Eisenhower didn't really care for it so much and gave it back to the United States Navy. And then over here is his shirt. They have tropical shirts when they go down to the Florida Keys. They like to go down there and relax. The cabinet and other friends, sometimes they didn't shave. During that whole time, they liked to play poker. They did a lot of work too, but they all kind of just went down there and relaxed when they were down in that area. Then over here is the Blair House. This is Margaret and Bess together up here. And there's Harry, waving at the front door. And there he is playing the piano. He's a very good piano player. And there's a nice picture of him there in front of the fireplace. That's his mother-in-law. And she died at the White House when they got back in 1952. Over here is Chaim Weizmann. He was the first president of Israel. And that's again over at the Blair House there in that time period. Cabinet. Bess was the chairman or the honorary chairman for the Girl Scouts. And she got really into that during her First Lady days. He walked 120 steps a minute, and he was very much he liked physical fitness, and his health was as good when he went out as he went in being president. And there he is with Winston Churchill and Harry Truman here. So, they were very friends. Any questions? Well, let's keep on rolling here. We're going to go this way. We're going to go now.
Is this what they ate with? So they ate with a good golden spoon? And nice. Look at that. That's cool.
We'll use the elevator. Get extra fun.
Is this where they keep the cars?
This is where we keep cars, yeah. This is
Franklin B.
the portrait there, that's
Oh.
Thomas R.
Thomas
Benton
R.
there.
Benton.
The
We
guy-
went by his house the other day, I showed you. You know what, you might, I'll let her sit, we'll sit here and you do the cars.
You could kind of over here, you
Yeah.
can listen a little bit.
Yeah, we can listen to him do the cars. These are all the cars he had.
These are the cars
Yeah.
that he had when he was a senator, these two cars. And the one with the four-door was best, and the two-door was was for Harry. And then over here is one of the limos they used to drive dignitaries around in. And then down here is a buggy they had down in Grandview, Missouri. You guys, some of you guys, are you from Kansas City? Grandview's about 30 minutes south of here by car. Back in the day, that would be a couple hours in the buggy. But later on, he was able to get to Stadford, and it would go 60 miles an hour, so he could make the trip a lot faster. Behind there is the farmhouse they had in Grandview, Missouri. It didn't have the toilet was outside, so it got a little bit cold going to the bathroom in the middle of the night. But when we go down here, we'll go here and look at this little home, model home. It's a model of the Truman home. This would be the Wallace home. And he didn't ever own a home until after he was president. And he bought the equity out from the Wallace, her brother. And so he had his home here for himself then. But up to that point, he only lived in rental homes and with his parents, and then the White House, the Blair House, and whatever. So finally, after he was president, he had his own place. Here's some pictures of the house now. Back when I was pretty young, they didn't even have a gate around it. But in 1954, here's Harry and Bess, or Harry and Margaret. But it's that home right there. Pretty good size home. However, the way I understand, there were 6 bedrooms upstairs, but only had 1 bathroom. Sometimes they had like 4 families living in there at one time. There's the gate they had. When I was growing up, they had a gate there, because people would go over there and try to take things off the side of the home there. So let's go back upstairs here.
Okay.
Are you enjoying yourself?
Yes.
Good. I'm trying to get you as close as I can.
Well, we're good.
Yeah.
We can always do off planning, so
Right.
just have your babies.
This is a nice big elevator.
Yeah, big freight elevator, yeah.
It's even bigger, you can put the car in.
And we're gonna look at We're gonna come out, we're gonna make a left here. Just keep right on going. This first exhibit, that was a famous table. That was the table Johnson came back and
Yeah, I
signed.
saw him yesterday.
Came into Medicare.
Come
And
back to church.
Oh, really? There's a table that signed Medicare?
And then for all you people who would like to do trivia type thing, Harry and Bess are the 1 and 2 Medicare recipients. The reason he came back here is Harry was trying to get national health care through and failed. but then they got Medicare through, and they used this table to do that. Also, Madeleine Albright came in here and signed in to the NATO, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. They joined the NATO, and they used this table
We
here
need him
also.
to come back.
Yeah. Let's go on down here. These are his footsteps, and the kids, you take the kids through there. They always like to put their feet in there and see if they're how they match up or compare with Harry's feet.
Well, they have to be similar size.
Truman.
A little bit bigger.
This here is always one of my favorite views. And in the wintertime, it's even prettier, I think. But you can look out in the courtyard, and this is the eternal flame of freedom. It was given to us by Post 21 here in Kansas City. Independence, actually, on 40 Highway. And they had to do a little few repairs on it the other day, but it's going well right now. But of course, you look out there and see the graves in his office and the green of it. It's really a pretty sight. So let's go to the start of the museum here around the corner.
You get tired, just let me know.
Truman dead at 80. Was he a Republican or a Democrat? Was he a Republican or Democrat? Was he a Republican or Democrat?
Democrat.
Okay.
I present to this convention for the office of President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Democrats convene in Chicago to elect presidential and vice presidential nominees. Senator Harry S. Truman of Missouri is nominated as the running mate for FDR. It's been my privilege to be a United States Senator for the past 9.5 years, and I expect to continue the effort to help shorten the war and win the peace under the direction of our great leader, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Returning to Washington with Mr. Roosevelt, Harry Truman was now the Vice President-elect. In his first speech after his inauguration, Vice President Truman said,
American democracy is to survive. Germany and Japan must be defeated in battle, and thereby taught to respect the rights of other nations. Surface units, the Pacific Fleet, are bombarding Iwo Jima. Aircraft of the Strategic Air Force are now attacking military targets in and around Tokyo.
The Operation Sea Alive on all fronts has now brought the German war to its final stage. There was a sign we must continue fighting till the final count. We know our enemy well. It is expecting to fight hard to save our lives.
Interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died at
An era has come to an end. For us, it is more like the death of a father than of an official.
This nation has suffered this day a staggering loss. Vice President Harry Truman, who from here on will be President Truman, went immediately to the White House.
The greatest question mark in every American heart is about Truman. Can he swing the job? And despite his limited capabilities, I think he can.
He comes into office almost unknown to the people at large, and they will await with great anxiety the result of the test that he has to meet.
Roosevelt was a great architect. Perhaps Truman will be a good carpenter.
When people think of President Truman, it is with a mixture of friendliness, loyalty, and gentle skepticism.
No man ever came to the presidency of the United States under more difficult circumstances than does Harry S. Truman.
It would be foolish to pretend that President Truman possesses the qualities of leadership needed by the nation at the moment.
Okay, everybody, it's a short film, so let's keep going. I'm going to talk about this wall here. This is this family tree. This is usually where we begin the tour, but we've had a little bit of a crowd here, so we're kind of letting them thin out. But anyway, this is Harry when he was a young man, and he doesn't have his glasses on. They didn't know he didn't need glasses until he wasn't following the fireworks display, and his mother immediately put him in the buggy and brought him up to Grandview, and he got fitted for those big, thick glasses he has to wear. This is his family. They're farm families here, and he gets a lot of his teachings from his mother, and she was into music also, and she taught him to, that she wanted him to be a piano player, and that's what he ended up doing. And the S stands for S, and sometimes you'll see over at the home, you'll see it without the period, but over here we usually have the period on there. But it kind of comes from a compromise from Anderson Ship Truman, yes, and down here is Solomon Truman. Over here is Bess Truman. This is a city family. That's a farm family over there, and the money kind of comes from this area here. They had an elevator here in Independence, and they built, and they did flour. And if you look over here, that bag of flour is the flour they did was the queen of the pantry. Very good flour. It's considered some of the best flour you can buy. So they made quite a bit of money. Well, her father was a real, looked like top-notch, everything, but he kind of had a few problems, few vices, and he ran him out of money. And so he ended up one day committed suicide. That was a big deal, of course, suicide in the family, but it was also, they kind of kept it a secret. But Bess's mother, Margaret, always tried to keep Bess at home. She was the one who was going to take care of her. Brothers were going to go off and get married and all that. So it was difficult for Harry to get this woman to marry him because mother here was always kind of hanging on to her. But that also was because they were a farm family and he was a city family. And they had quite a bit of money also on that side. Over here, when he was young, the Trumans down in Grandview wanted him to get a good education, and so they looked up here to Independence for the public school district, and so they decided it was a bigger one, he'd get a better education, so they moved everybody up to Independence, and he started going to school here. He met Bess at an early age, and he fell in love with her. He had a big time crush on this woman. She didn't have a crush on him at all. But they liked each other, but they weren't going to hold hands or anything like that. This is their graduating class. Got this little graduating class here in Independence. There were 3 members of the administration, and Harry, Bess, and one of his best friends, Charlie Ross. He was a valedictorian. They used to compete with each other on how many books they could read. These two, Bess and Harry, were total opposites. She was very athletic. When she was in Barstow finishing school, she threw the shot put. She liked to play baseball. She played a lot of golf, a lot of tennis. She liked being a tomboy. Here's a guy who would get up early in the morning and take his piano lessons and whatever, and he'd read books. Said he read all the books at the Independence Public Library. And so you're talking about two people that were opposites. But he was in love with her, and she wasn't quite in love with him at that point. So they graduated high school, and he goes and gets a job at the Santa Fe, not Santa Fe Railroad, the railroad, and he was going to be a timekeeper for him, payroll, and then he was going to work at the bank. He didn't want to go back to the farm, but he ended up having to go back to the farm. His dad made some bad investments, and then he asked him to come back to the farm. He did, and he's now working back there after about 5 years working in the banking business. And during this time, he also joined the Missouri National Guard, and he really enjoyed that. It helped him set him up so when he went to World War I, he had a big head start on the other soldiers, the volunteers there, because he had all this training. So you look at what he had to overcome to get Bess to marry him. This is a farm family here, and this over here was Bess's family. They're on the tennis court, so they're miles apart in how they, they've been raised. But one day after about 5 years, he came up to visit his aunt who had the piano, and he was over there, and his aunt said, "Would you take this cake pan back over to the Wallace home?" She knew that he had a crush on this Beth, but he goes across the street with this pan, and he knocks on the door, and luck was with him. Beth answered the door, and she sees a different guy other than that bookworm that was in high school. She sees the guy's been working on the farm, baling hay, out in the sun and all that. His shoulders are broadened out. He's got a tan. And she said, "Well, we'll just, maybe we can go here with something." So they started to date. And he would go over there on Sunday dinners, and luckily, his future mother-in-law loved how he played the piano. And he played the piano really well. He played the master, Chopin, Beethoven, that type of stuff. And so he was kind of, making some headway there a little bit with Beth. And he asked her to marry, and she said no. And so he said, "Well, I got to figure out a way of getting that to work out." But anyway, his mother, fortunately, gave him enough money to buy this car. So now he could come up here more often. He was writing her letters all the time, writing these letters to her. But then he got this car, and now he could go 60 miles an hour from Grandview up here to Independence. And he would go on picnics with her brothers and with his cousins that lived across the street from him. And so he was doing pretty well. He tried to get rich. The get rich quick type stuff. He got into oil business, wildcatting. He went broke in that, made bad investments. But they did eventually. He wasn't there at the time, but they did hit one of the largest pools of oil in Kansas, and he didn't get involved in that. Then the mining business, he was going to get in that, thinking that they need mining minerals and all that. So when they go to World War I, he'd be all set up. But he had a crooked partner, and they went broke on that. So now he's got this money he owes. Not only that, he still hasn't gotten married, but the war breaks out, World War I breaks out, and he's got this training, and he wants to go over there. So they get engaged, Bess and him get engaged, and he's going to go off to World War I. Now, before he can get in there, he has to pass this eye test, and his eyesight's so bad that he couldn't do it without the glasses. So what he ended up doing is memorizing the eye chart. And after he memorized the eye chart, he went right on in. So now we're going to go over here to the movie and see how that's going. It's perfect. Well, no, can't. We'll have to wait. Well, let's go over here. We'll use our time wisely. Everybody just come in this room here. The movie is right in the middle of it. We can't. But I'm going to go back to the movie. But this is after the war. After he comes back to the war. The first thing he's going to do is marry Bess. And this is a picture of Harry and Bess. Their wedding day. And there's her brother walked her down the aisle because her dad, had died. And then this is one of the other officers in Battery D, which is the artillery battery he's in. And so he's also a tailor here in Kansas City, and he makes Harry a suit right there. And these here's two cousins. And but anyway, he's gotten married. Now the next thing you know, he's got to have a job, so he gets involved with Eddie Jacobson. You'll hear his name during the movie. He's a Jewish man, and later on you'll find out he's also a lobbyist for Israel. But Eddie and Harry get involved in that, and they make pretty good money the first year. The second year, kind of goes down, the margins shrink, and then the third year they go broke. Wheat prices dropped here in Kansas City, and so then no one had any money. So now he's out of a job. So luckily, one of the men in Battery D, one of the officers, was Jimmy Pendergast. And his dad was Mike Pendergast, and his brother was Tom Pendergast, who ran the political machine here in Jackson County, which is where we're standing right now. And so he says, would you like to run for Eastern County judge? And he said, yeah, of course he needs a job. So he does. He wins the election with the help of the Pendergasts. And then the next term, only on 2-year terms, the next term he loses that election. It's the only election he ever loses in his whole life. He loses that second going in to be Eastern County judge. Now he doesn't have a job, but about coincidentally, Margaret's born about the same time. So now they have Margaret, and they're going, he's going to, got more, he got his debts he still has from the haberdashery, from the oil, and from the mining business. Now he's got a child. And she's perfect. She does everything. She's, just the apple of his eye. She learns to play the piano. She's an opera singer. He always called her Miss Skinny. You can see it's a very slender woman. That bottle is full of the glass that when she christened the USS Missouri, the glass is inside that little silver bottle there. But so now he's got a child. He's got debts, and now he's gonna run for the presiding judge over this county. And it was on a 4-year term. He wins that election, and then he runs again and wins another election. So that's 8 years. He's still got a lot of debts. He's still got all these things, so he needs to keep going. And so Tom Pendergast, they decided running for a senator of Missouri. And so that's where we're going to turn the corner here. Let's see how our movie's going here. Might be about ready. Let's come over here. We can watch the movie now.
Oh wow, this is a canning you're talking about.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, I was told the story on how true it is, but I heard they were trying to get the cannon upstairs here when Truman was still alive, and they needed to dismantle it to get it on the elevator. And the only person who really knew how to do it was Harry Truman. And so he, here you had the guy himself, helping out on how to get the cannon up here. But this is an important piece of artillery. It's a 75 millimeter French-made cannon. We didn't take any cannons over. The Americans didn't take any cannons over to France, but we operated these cannons, and these were state of the art, very good. The thing that Truman had problems with is he hadn't gone to college. He didn't have advanced math classes, so now he's going to have to figure this out. And he's a very good reader. He comprehends what he reads. He fitted it all together, and he became really good at it. So they take him over to France, and he's even trained in some of the academy guys and college people how to operate this cannon. So he's really doing very well. He gets his own battery. He's the commander of his own battery, Battery D, which is important because he stays with Battery D his whole life. Even after he dies, they still they get together and tearing up hotel rooms up here in Kansas City. But anyway, this was very important. This is the caisson that you'll hear about. You'll say the colonel didn't want people to hang on to the caisson, but this was a very important thing for him, and he learns that he can handle men. You'll also hear the name Eddie Jacobson during this part, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him. You guys want to come in and sit down? You're welcome. You're okay? Okay. It's about 10 minutes long, so you might get those museum legs,
Yeah.
start to stagger around out here.
The Great War in Europe had been raging for almost 3 years when President Wilson declared war on Germany. At the time, Harry Truman was a 33-year-old farmer in Grandview, Missouri. Though too old to be drafted, he was determined to enlist. He left his mother and the farm in his sister's care, said goodbye to his girlfriend Bess, and drove to Kansas City, where he rejoined the National Guard. It was a decision that would change his life. He wrote Bess, "I wouldn't be left out of the greatest history-making epic the world has ever seen for all there is to live for." At a training camp in Oklahoma, Truman started a successful canteen with Eddie Jacobson, a man who would later become a business partner and lifelong friend. After 7 months in Oklahoma, Truman was sent to France for artillery training. Though he had only attended some college, he suddenly found himself taking advanced trigonometry and high-level engineering courses. "I've studied more and worked harder in the last 3 weeks than I ever did before in my life," Harry wrote Bess. He was soon promoted to captain, in charge of Battery D, notorious for their rowdy behavior and for running through captains.
D Battery was a pretty wild bunch of Irish. They had 2 or 3 other captains, and none of them could handle them.
I didn't care much for Truman. I didn't care much for the idea of going through a war with a man I considered a sissy.
He gave the impression of a professor more than he did an artillery officer. He had those thick glasses.
During the first battle in France, Truman proved his mettle. He positioned his battery on a mountain facing German encampments across the valley and began a barrage of fire.
We were firing away, having a hell of a good time doing it, until we woke somebody up over there.
When the Germans started firing back, a shell burst near Truman, and his horse fell on top of him. A lieutenant pulled him out, but in the chaos, a sergeant panicked and ordered the men to run and take cover.
I hit the ground. I led the parade. That was the battle of who run. We all run. Captain Truman was about the only one that didn't run.
Truman couldn't contain his fury. "I got up and called them everything I knew," he later recalled. Pretty soon, they came sneaking back.
Truman not only commanded the outfit, he owned it. He was the first captain we had that we felt knew what he was doing.
In early September, Battery D began a nearly 100-mile march to the front. Under cover of darkness, they trudged through relentless rain and mud. The men and their horses were exhausted.
There was an order that we were not to hold on to the caisson, so as not to put any more burden on the horses. They were in bad shape, but walking along almost dead on your feet, you could hardly resist.
When a colonel saw some of Truman's men holding onto a wagon, he ordered Truman to punish them. Truman refused, telling the colonel that the men were worn out.
We thought that was a pretty fine act on the part of Truman.
The Meuse-Argonne offensive began in September. It would be the largest land offensive ever in military history. Battery D moved into position, setting up their artillery at Cheppy. Truman's orders were to protect only his own division. But through his binoculars, he spotted Germans aiming their artillery at another American division. Disobeying orders, he told his men to fire on the Germans.
Truman said, "Fire at will. Fire as fast as you can." We just poured them in there.
Truman didn't panic. He had his firing data exact. We knocked all 4 of the Germans' guns out.
While Truman was threatened with a court-martial for disregarding orders, nothing came of it. In the final weeks of the war, the 129th Field Artillery moved into action in Verdun. They fired their last shots 15 minutes before the armistice took effect. Harry wrote Bess, "I brought my battery forward under fire and never lost a horse nor a man."
He had a very quiet sort of way of serving as a leader. He was a disciplinarian, but very fair. I can't describe what the personal magnetism was, except that he had it.
He wasn't a military character, especially. He was like a man getting his family around a table and telling them what he could expect of everybody.
In their short time together, Truman won his men's admiration and friendship for life.
Truman had respect for his men, and his men had a lot of respect for him. That's the way it goes.
At the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the Great War ended. Truman returned home to independence with a newfound confidence that would serve him well in the future. The confidence to lead.
Okay, my group, let's go this way. We're gonna start up when he's a senator now. Well, there's some other places to sit down. I'll find them for you. Now, his son becomes senator. He's been a judge. Judgeship is not a legal position. It's more like a commissioner. You know, you're like getting municipalities, money for highways, that kind of stuff. Things kind of overnight where he was doing the judgeship. Now he becomes a senator. And he really enjoys being a senator. He gets on some committees, things he thinks he can help in the state of Missouri with. And he the second time he runs for election, it's going to be even tougher because Tom Pendergast, who is a crooked machine, political machine person here in Jackson County, he's now in prison for tax evasion, similar to Al Capone did. But anyway, so now he doesn't have that help. So he runs again, tough election, and he wins for less than 8,000 votes. He wins the election, but now he's back in for a second term. And he goes around, he notices that when he's going around in the election, or trying to run for election as senator, he's seeing a lot of waste out there of some of the money that's being spent for the defense program. So he decides he's going to put together a bipartisan committee to investigate this. And what it was the national, let's see if I can find the wording here, the National Defense Program, but it was just shortened the Truman Committee. And so now he's doing that. This is his committee, bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans. They do a lot of good things. Their committees cost for about $300,000 or $400,000 it costs to make up the committee. They save billions of dollars. That's with a B, billions of dollars. But the most important thing is what they did was they saved a lot of lives. A lot of the machinery, a lot of the planes were not, properly, the engines would fall off of them. Boats would go out in the water and crack in half. Some of the landing craft, they put a tank on it and sink. So a lot of these men, we're saving a lot of lives, as Mr. Truman is at that point. So he's really getting kind of a name for himself. He's on the front page, or on the Time magazine on the cover here, a big deal, and all that. So he's kind of well known. Well, 1944 rolls around, and Roosevelt's going to run for fourth term. The vice president that Roosevelt has is a very liberal vice president. And everybody except maybe Franklin, they know that Franklin's not going to make it through this 4 years. And so now the vice president is probably going to be the president when they elect him. And the Southern Democrats do not want a real liberal vice president. And so they want to get a compromise. Well, Harry Truman is a more of a compromise candidate. So Roosevelt asked him to run. Reluctantly, he does run for vice president with him. Wallace is out now. So now they run. Of course, they win the election. But 82 days later, Franklin Roosevelt's going to die down at Warm Springs. And so now he's going to be the president. Now, he finds out he's over at Sam Rayburn's office. And a messenger comes over and gets Truman from over at the Senate and brings him over to the White House, and he goes upstairs to the living quarters. And Eleanor says, Harry, the president has died. And he immediately comes out and said, what can I do for you? Kind of like, I'm on me, because not what we can do. It's not what you can do for me, Harry. It's what we can do for you now. You're the one that's in trouble. And then he realizes he's got to get going as president. They had him met like twice during this time period, the Franklin and Harry. And so they don't know, he doesn't know the strategies, he doesn't know what went on at Yalta. There's lots of things that he talks about, he doesn't really know what the atomic bomb's gonna bring him. So let's kind of sneak around the corner. Now, the film is on Franklin Roosevelt dying and coming back up from Georgia to Washington. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time, so we can kind of glance over that way. Anybody wants to join in, that's fine. That's a free tour.
President died of a cerebral hemorrhage.
Vice President
That over there is the Bible that they had. They couldn't find a Bible, they eventually found one, and that's her hat there, that's his hat.
Inside in the historic cabinet room, Vice President Harry S. Truman takes the oath of office as 32nd President, administered by Chief Justice.
You can see he doesn't have his hand up in the air, they had to redo the swearing in again, and then they did it. And then they originally did it, they used Harry Ship Truman, because his S is all it stands for. Yeah. So they had to, he said back to the judge, he said, I, Harry S. Truman. So he corrected him at that point. Everybody was pretty nervous, you know, Franklin Roosevelt passing was a big deal. That's the rear end of the Ferdinand Magellan. That's the Pullman car that he goes around and does his whistle stop tour, 30-some thousand miles. And always, when I look at this, it always reminds me, personally, reminds me of when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, when they brought his body back, and they had all those people. And there's the Ferdinand Magellan pulling in. That was Franklin Roosevelt's specially designed Pullman car. That's Wallace over there to the right. He was the liberal vice president that he's probably thinking, well, if I'd been vice president, I would have been president, yeah. But yeah, it was a lot of people, I remember my folks talking about it, and probably a lot of you people did too. It was a big deal. Now then, let's kind of look down this way here.
People had a lot more support, a lot more respect for the presidents back then, didn't they? You know?
Yeah, I think so. Now, we look down here, this first 4 months of his presidency, a lot went on. And when they did this exhibit, they tried to set that up as such. Now, when you look down here, you see these little things coming down, you know, and the red ones are kind of the big moments, dates that he had involved. But right off the bat, he learned about the Holocaust. He didn't really, everybody knew that the Holocaust was going on. They just didn't know the magnitude of it. And so that kind of hits his desk first. Then he's got to meet with Molotov. Molotov is the Russian diplomat. He's the head guy. He's tough as nails. And Truman doesn't even know what went on in Yalta. And so he reads up. And Truman's a good reader. He gets all ready and he holds his own against the foreign minister of Russia. And then over here it says he learns about the atomic bomb. And the Secretary of War, they called it Secretary of War back then, it wasn't Secretary of Defense. But he tells him about the atomic bomb, but they don't know if it works or not. So it's not really something he can, go out and tell everybody, we got this atomic bomb and stuff. They don't even know if it's going to light up the whole Western Hemisphere. I mean, they have no idea what's going on. If you saw Oppenheimer, he kind of talked about that. But the war's going to end here pretty quick next month over here. Berlin falls to the Red Army, and then the Germany surrenders, and now they got to get together with Stalin and Churchill and Truman. They've got to discuss how this peace is going to be. Now, Stalin doesn't want to give up any of Eastern Europe, so he's going to be pushing back all the time. Well, Churchill and Truman are thinking, if we got this atomic bomb, they'll get out. We can push them back in their borders again, but we got to figure out whether it works or not. So they go down here, and one of the things he had to do was he was signing the United States and the United Nations. That was something Roosevelt had been working on. So he did that. But then when he goes over to Potsdam, they tell him that the bomb works. Oppenheimer says it works just the way they were hoping it's going to work. Now Churchill and Truman are sitting there going, well, we need to tell Stalin about this so that we can get Stalin during this surrender document stuff. Maybe we can get them out of Eastern Europe. But there's so many spies in the Manhattan Project that there's a pretty good chance that Stalin knew about the atomic bomb before Truman did. And so nothing went on. I mean, it was just these stone-faced, Stalin was. So when we go down here, this is what I call down here is the atomic bomb run. We'll talk a little bit more, but the bombs were dropped on the 6th and the 8th of August, 1945, and then Japan surrenders. We have a couple of little exhibits here. And there's a chair right there. Does she want to sit in? Yeah, that's good. Now then, the bombs were dropped. One on Hiroshima, that was Little Boy, and the other bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, that was Fat Man. Now this exhibit here is the safety plug from Fat Man that was dropped on Nagasaki. Now what would happen is the planes, the B-29s would take off from Tinian Island. Now they wouldn't arm the bombs because obviously they don't want it to go off there on the island. It was one of the busiest airports in the world at that time. B-24s, B-29s, had the Marine Corps there. So they take off and they fly out there onto the ocean, and then the technicians would go back and they would pull these plugs out. So there's 3 of them on each bomb. And you can kind of see it looks like kind of a cork, it can be in a bottle. And then they replace it with the detonating plugs. Now, most of the time, these plugs were already earmarked as souvenirs for higher ups, like generals and whatever. Well, this plug got away from him, and the technician put it in his pocket. And then when he died later on, he sent it back to the Truman Library. And so now we have it, and we're very happy we have it, this plug. But anyway, I've seen on eBay has sold some of them, and they're in private museums, and they go for over $100,000 for a plug now. And then over here, where she's standing, is about a little girl named Sadako Sasaki, and she was 1 year old when the bomb went off in Hiroshima, and lost her house, a lot of her family and pets, they were all gone, but she survived. She was badly burned. She gets well enough, but until about 10 years later, she developed blood poisoning from radioactivity, and she's back in the hospital. And one of the things in Japanese lore, if you would make 1,000 of these little origami cranes, your wish will come true. This one here, these little bitty ones. These big ones were made by kids here in elementary schools around Independence. But this little bitty one, and this was given to us by her brother, sent it to the museum. And she made 1,000 of them. And she made 2 wishes. One was to get well, but she didn't. She died at 12 years old. She died. The other one was to have world peace. And we all know we don't have world peace. But we haven't dropped another atomic bomb in anger either. So maybe that helped out there if you believe in that. So anyway, the war is over. Atomic bombs are dropped. And now we're going to go into the Cold War. So let's go over here.
Jose.
Now, I always like to bring out, if you look at this bar graph, down here, the United States lost 418,500 people. Most of them were military. The blue is civilians. Now, but if you look over here, 27 million Soviet Union, so the Russians that died. And then over here, Chinese. And then on Germany. So a lot more things were going on to a lot of other countries more than what the United States did. Even though 418,000 is a lot of people. Now we didn't have our industry affected by the war. We had a lot of women working in the workforce now, so we have all that we can draw upon. We have a lot of the men are coming back from the war, and they're going to be working in industry. And then on top of that, we have the atomic bomb. And that makes us the most powerful country in the world. We still are. But it wasn't until 1949 that the Russians, the Soviet Union, got their atomic bomb. So we were kind of, we're the top dog. However, they're in Eastern Europe, something we didn't want them to be there. And they were trying to take over more countries with communism. And the United States and their allies were going to push them back. And that's where the Cold War started. When they were pushing in, we were going to push them back. And then we had to feed a lot of people, too, over in Europe. So this here is the USS Missouri, and this is on the decks of the USS Missouri. That's Admiral Nimitz. And there's Hirohito. He was considered a god in Japan. That was one of the concessions the United States and the Allies made because it was unconditional, but they wanted to have their emperor. And that's Douglas MacArthur, General Douglas MacArthur. He was the governor of Japan, and he did a marvelous job of getting that country back up and going again. So let's go over here. got 2 minutes of showtime.
I think it's over.
This is perfect. We're starting the movie, actually. You get to sit down and relax. Now, I really like this movie. I could talk your way through it, but it's better to have the Stephanopoulos do it. But this is where they're going. Some things I want you to kind of listen for is, first of all, is the Truman Doctrine. That's when they're going to push back on the Soviets. Whenever they were pushing in with communism, they were going to push back. And then the Marshall Plan. And that's that we're having to feed these people. It doesn't do any good to push back if we're not giving them food to eat. So we're trying, General Marshall and his plan is going to start that up. You're also going to see NATO is starting up. We hear NATO all the time now, but this is when NATO starts up, right here with the Truman administration. But all these countries over in Europe and probably over in Asia and Japan, they all look like this. The United States kind of comes out, you know, looking pretty good at this point. So we're going to feed all these people. So it's going to start up in 30 seconds. It is a good movie. I like the way they set up, you know, they use all that stuff for the film.
A video for which the whole Allied world has been waiting. East and West have met. Nazi Germany has been split clean in half.
Victory. But what will victory bring? After 6 years of brutal war, Europe lies in ruins. Its people are starving, and President Truman finds himself at the head of a crumbling alliance. The threat of Nazi Germany has forced the United States and the Soviet Union into an uneasy partnership. But how long can this alliance last? Truman is troubled as Russia begins exerting control over Eastern Europe, but he won't risk sparking World War III. At the Potsdam Conference, he attempts to contain Soviet ambitions at the negotiating table, but fails. Within months of the conference, the Soviet Union installs communist governments in Albania and Poland. Bulgaria and Hungary seem poised to fall as well. Former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill issues a grim warning.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended.
Some of the president's advisors urge him to take a harder line. Truman agrees. When he appoints General George Marshall as his new Secretary of State, he knows Marshall, a tough, practical war hero, understands the consequences of letting communism go unchecked. In Turkey, the Soviets are pressuring the cash-strapped government. And in Greece, communist guerrillas are gaining ground in a bloody civil war. Truman and Marshall seize the opportunity to challenge Soviet aggression. Truman goes before Congress to convince the nation to get into the fight, but not militarily.
I therefore ask the Congress.
He asks for financial support for Greece and Turkey. He then urges America to embrace its role as a world leader, defending democracy wherever it's threatened.
The free peoples of the world look to us for support in maintaining their freedom. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world, and we shall surely endanger the welfare of this nation.
The Truman Doctrine, as it comes to be known, is a bold new foreign policy, one that sends a clear message to Russia. Wherever you push, we push back. Truman goes one step further. Under the direction of Secretary of State Marshall, the United States decides to help finance the recovery of Western Europe.
It is a difficult program, but there's no doubt whatever in my mind that if we decide to do this thing, we can do it successfully.
For the next year, the battle for Europe is fought with freighters rather than destroyers, with tractors instead of tanks.
The faith of totalitarian regimes reach their full growth when the hope of a people for a better life has died. We must keep that hope alive.
Program by program, speech by speech, Truman lashes together the free nations of Europe into a new coalition, one he hopes will be strong enough to break the tide of communism sweeping across the continent. Stalin responds aggressively in Berlin, a city deep inside communist-held Germany. After the war, the Allies divided Berlin. American, French, and British troops occupy the western half. The Soviets hold the east and control all roads, rail lines, and rivers leading to Berlin. On June 24th, 1948, Stalin orders them closed. The blockade is a hostile move to force out the Western Allies, but Truman does not blink. We stay in Berlin, period. 2 million people live in West Berlin. Without new shipments, its food, fuel, and medicine will run out within a month. To avoid disaster, Truman must act quickly. He decides to take a risk. Supply Berlin by air. He orders servicemen alongside American allies to fly unarmed planes directly over Russian guns. If they shoot, he knows it could start World War III. He gambles that they won't. But the cost is immense. Stalin believes that Truman will fold. He doesn't, and the flights continue. Finally, after almost a year, Truman's persistence wins out. Stalin yields and lifts the siege. But West Berlin remains an isolated democracy behind the Iron Curtain. The Berlin airlift helped cement Truman's new alliance. But across Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world, the line between democracy and communism grows more rigid, more contentious, and more deadly. Under the constant threat of nuclear destruction, the world emerges into a tense, uncertain stalemate and is gripped by a new kind of war, a Cold War.
Okay, everybody, this way, please. Groups are getting intertwined. Okay, you want to go straight out?
Yeah.
I guess you just go back the same way you came in this way.
All right.
Let's go down here a little bit. This Berlin airlift is going to, this is what this exhibit is supposed to show. And this is the inside of a cargo plane. And there's a man in there working, trying to get the flour, everything you need in West Berlin, shoe polish, food, hot dogs, socks, whatever you need, soap. It all had to be flown in. And these guys would fly in. These represent 594 planes flew into West Berlin every day for 11 months. And they did a few collisions and stuff, but none of them were shot down. And they finally broke, Stalin finally gave up and relented and opened up the railroads and canals and all that. Over here it talks about a man in Albert. He was called the candy bomber, and he used to drop candy out of his plane to the kids, whatever, down below. You can see all those kids are probably older than I am now, but that's how you win the hearts and minds of people doing that kind of behavior when Halverson would do that. So let's move on. Spent a lot of time in here, but this is Israel, and he got involved in Israel after the war. You had a lot of Jewish people that escaped the Holocaust, and they wanted a place to home. And so some of them were immigrated country. A lot of them came down and wanted to go to Palestine. And they wanted that to be their home. And unfortunately, the Palestinians were there. And so there was a little bit of conflict. The United Nations partitioned it off. The West Gaza and the West Bank. You've probably heard that 1,000 times. But that's what the Palestinians were going to live. And then the rest of it would be Israel, would be where the Jewish people would live. Now, Truman got involved in it when they became a country. The United States became the first country to recognize them as a country. 11 minutes after they were recognized, and they went in and Truman signed off on it. So, anyways, and then over here is on civil rights after the war. A lot of the soldiers and stuff were coming back from the war, and some of them obviously were from minorities. And in this particular case, a man named Isaac Woodard Jr., he was a black man in South Carolina, sergeant. He was on a bus. The bathroom wasn't working. He needed to get off the bus and go to the bathroom. The bus driver said he was causing problems. And so the next stop, the sheriff came up, got up onto the bus, and they, with his deputies, and they dragged him off, and they beat him to a pulp. And then they took him to jail. Then later on, they beat him up some more, and then they blinded him with nightsticks. And Truman found out about it. It was done on federal property, and so there was he made sure that there was going to be a court case on it, so it just didn't go away. It did have a trial. The jury, even the sheriff, even admitted to doing all the things he did wrong. He admitted to all this. He ended up being exonerated. He was innocent by the jury. It only took him 30 minutes to go outside and then come back in and say that you're innocent. And that really bothered Truman. And he knew that a lot of this was going on, just not South Carolina, it was going on all over the United States. And how men were being, and women, and minorities were being treated unfairly by the places that they had helped fight to get the freedoms. And then he also was the first president to speak at an NAACP meeting. He had 2 executive orders. One was to integrate the military, and the other was to integrate the federal government. And so he was trying to do something for these people, even though he really came from more of a segregated background here in Independence. He kind of changed, and he realized that a lot of these people were being treated improperly. But a lot of these things with Israel and civil rights, it was causing his popularity to be down. And so now his popularity is almost as low as. And there was that Wallace, the liberal vice president, he was running against him for the Democratic nomination. And another guy from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond, was running against him. And so he had to win that nomination, and he did. And then he was running against the Democratic or the Republican candidate, who was Thomas Dewey. And Thomas Dewey was a good candidate. He was so far ahead that I think even Thomas Dewey was wishing that he had more of a more competitive election, because Truman wasn't going to give him much competition. But he found out later, after Truman did 30,000 miles in that Pullman car, the Ferdinand Jones, he pulled ahead of Thomas Dewey, and then when they went into election, he won it. Not only did he win it, he also won the Congress. And so now he is back as president in his own right, no longer just under Roosevelt's coattail. He's now the president, and he's going to go in 1949 and start his presidency. So if you would, let's go this way. Here's some pretty good pictures over here. This is a Norman Rockwell. He's a famous artist. That's an original one. It kind of shows Thomas Dewey on the man, and she's got Truman there, and the baby down here below is crying. But that was kind of how it was. It was a real close election, but Truman worked really, really hard. And this movie, we're not going to watch the movie, it's too long, it's not for another 10 minutes. But this is supposed to represent the back of a Pullman car. And he'd get out there and you see the speakers up there, and he'd give them hell, so to speak. And he won. And you can see up there that the Chicago Daily Tribune thought that Dewey was going to win so much that they even put the papers out and said that Dewey had defeated Truman. And so, you know, it was a very much a surprise. So let's go this way.
You like pickles? I'll go back and tell them yes. We love pickles. Alright, thank you everybody for watching. This is interesting. I had no idea about any of this stuff.
And then the Republicans were for it. They really wasn't getting anything done at all, so that was kind of a disappointment for them. And then, I don't know much about Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy was a conspiracy theorist. He was a Republican, and he was always saying there's communists in the government, and he really caused Truman a lot of headache. Anyway, that was going on. So let's go over to Korea.
Do you have an idea of the virus?
No.
Okay, come on, that one long thing. There's still a lot of the museum left here and here. Oh no.
¿Ya sabiste tú? They split the peninsula, the Korean peninsula in half. This was the bad guy, this was the communist side, and down here was the United Nations side, that's the good guys here. And they were always having little problems on the border of the 38th parallel. But things were kind of, they're still staying in peace. But until 1950, in June, they came across in force. And Truman was here in Independence at the time, and they thought maybe this was going to be World War III. So if you look at this map, when the communists went across, they pushed across the 38th parallel, the border. They pushed us all the way down there in this little corner, Tucson. And so this was a bad deal. If you remember, I was telling you that General MacArthur's over in Japan as governor. That's when Truman brought him back into the picture, and he had him come in and command the forces here in Korea. And he did kind of a little in and around, and he landed here in Incheon with the Marines, and the Army was going to break out, and the Marines were going to come down, and they were going to kind of squeeze the communists right there. And they did. And it was a wonderful move. And then we pushed all the way up here. So the communists squeezed up here. Now this is where Truman and MacArthur got into some problems with. He keeps pushing up into here, and there, right here is China. This is the Yalu River, and they have 250,000 troops there on the river. And they're telling Truman and MacArthur, don't come up any farther. You need to go back to the 38th parallel. MacArthur doesn't want to do that. Truman and the United Nations, they want to get it back down to the 38th parallel for a truce. About that time, China breaks loose with 250,000 troops, and they come down and they push us right on past the 38th parallel down in this area. That's when MacArthur gets released and comes back to Washington, D.C., and a congressional meeting committee was, and they agreed with Truman. But anyway, they fought it out right there, and they eventually, the General Ridgway took over, and they eventually got a truce right here, not right on the 38th parallel, but pretty close, right in that area right there. But Kim Jong-un, not just, all heard Kim Jong-un, that's where his country is. Here's United South Korea, and over here was a Korean War museum in Springfield, Illinois. They were going to shutter, and so they asked us if we wanted any of this artifacts, and of course we did, and we got those. Now, when I looked at this, I always see that you see more women involved in the military with the MASH units. You see better medical equipment at this point. And then right here in the middle is a letter from a man named Banning, and his son has been killed in Korea, a United States soldier, and he sent this back in protest to Truman, saying, he can keep it, and he hopes that maybe he gets one just like he did. And of course, he was hurt. Truman obviously was hurt by it too. He found the letter and the Purple Heart in his desk after he had died, and so we use it as an exhibit now. And then over here, when he was at my group, when we were over at the Blair House there for a while, but the Blair House, this is in front of the Blair House, and there was an assassination attempt. Puerto Rican nationalists were protesting the United States being the protector of Puerto Rico. These two guns were by the assassins. One of the White House policemen were shot and killed, and there was one assassin killed. And then over here is, I talked earlier about her being a singer. She was an opera singer. She was very good. I mean, she wasn't great, but she was really good. But she kind of like Truman. He was a really good piano player, but he couldn't make a living out of it necessarily. But anyway, she was singing, and one of the critics there said he didn't really care for it and panned her performance. And when Harry Truman saw the newspaper article, he wrote this letter to this Paul Hume. And he said, "Someday I hope to meet you. And when that happens, you'll need a new nose, a lot of beefsteak for black eyes, and perhaps a supporter down below." So Dad wasn't too happy about this. So he got this all put together, put a stamp on it, and put it out to the mailbox. Well, normally that wouldn't happen, but the backstory is, this is Charlie Ross. And Charlie Ross was the valedictorian of his high school class, and he was a chain smoker. But anyway, he's the press secretary, and normally he would probably catch something like this, but he's no longer around. He died that same day she sang, and that was, she called him Uncle Charlie, so it was a pretty traumatic day. And so when he died, that she probably wasn't feeling all that well about it. But anyway, later on, Paul Hume found out all these things were happening, and he called up here later to the museum, and he wanted to come up and make amends with Truman. And he did, and Truman played the piano, a couple of songs, and then they went to a concert together, so they kind of all healed up there. So, and then when he became the last days here, when Eisenhower was going to take the presidency in 1953, they had a little bit of had a rift going on. Truman was upset with Eisenhower because Senator McCarthy had said a lot of negative things about General Marshall, and he thinks Marshall walked on water, and he thought that Eisenhower should have spoken up against that, and Eisenhower sat on his hand, and so he was upset with Ike over that, because he said the reason you were able to be the Supreme Commander in Europe, you got those 5 stars on your shoulder, he said that was because of General Marshall, and you should have spoken up against McCarthy. But he didn't. But he became president, and they kind of got along well enough to get the inaugural in. And then they didn't really get along too well until when Kennedy was assassinated. They came back to Washington, D.C., both Eisenhower and Truman, and they were at the Blair House, and Truman got up and asked Ike if he'd like a plate of food, and Eisenhower had a big smile on his face, and the ice was broken, and they started to get along a little better. So anyway, Truman's no longer president, Eisenhower is. That's the end of the tour. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish I could have done Oprah tonight. Did you guys cancel, or is that what it was?
I don't know, I think we were kind of
All right, well, thank you. If you want to support, of course, I appreciate you guys being here. You guys know what to do. Hit the like, subscribe, share. I'm not going to make a big deal about it, even though it is. And there's donation links in the description if you want to support me going to things like this in my journey. I highly appreciate it. It did cost a little bit of money to come here today. But I really enjoyed it. And I hope you guys did too.